Everybody asks about this pile of white things here. That's my new boat dock.
Oh, cool.
Is what that is. It all clips together and makes a. We've got a fairly large bass pond just back up above the house there, about a quarter of a mile.
Where did you grow up then? How close to here?
As I grew up in the Dalles, is my dad actually had a place in Dalles also. Yeah. Both my sisters grew up here.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about, the talk that your sister did and about, riding the horse to school. And...
This is the Barlow Road, is when the...
right here.
We're actually driving on the Barlow Road now. When the county, the state bought the private road from the Barlow Road Company in 1923, and then turned most of it over to the counties. And the county did a lot of changing on where the route was, and this is really the only place on the ranch where the Barlow Road and the old county road are in the same place, because the rest of it's all in different, they don't line up.
When they switch from wagons to cars use the same road then?
They did until 1923. They had in 1923 is when the right of way changed quite a bit. And they were starting to get more and more cars there, and mainly freight trucks. Is the road up the gorge, just wasn't very good, and it would take it'd take almost 2 days to get from the Dalles to Portland if you went down the down the
Well, it's the old highway that they had to take, isn't it?
yeah,
Windy sucker.
and it wasn't built until the mid-20s.
Sand Hill.
So this is actually some of the best ruts are just right over here. So we'll walk right. I think you can see some of the markers that the Pioneer Trail Group has put in. Well, we can just walk right over here and get lined up
So
on
the wagons didn't all go in one line, and they were...
right. And then this was just where we came up out of that little gully there. The road actually, the county road actually left the Barlow Road, and it come up over. You can kind of see how it works when we get over there.
Okay.
This right here?
It's harder to see because there are trees across it, but you can see that white marker that's sticking up about halfway through.
I do see it.
Is
Yeah.
that and remember what.
Oh, behind us too, if you turn around.
There was
Yeah, there's like something like that.
there was a group of artifacts that they found through here that were broken pieces of wagon parts.
Oh, really?
And they so they were absolutely positive that this was the route, the wagon route.
Wow. Walk up there and take a picture of that white thing.
And there's one right behind it. Might be easier to get to.
Oh,
There's a road
yeah,
right
a lot
along
easier.
there, a worn spot, but that's not it.
No, that's just a road that we take to track cows down with.
And how they even recognize this as being ruts.
You know, is it?
It's hard.
My mother was very protective of these ruts, and was if I'm out chasing cows on a 4-wheeler and come to where I'm going to have to cross the ruts, is we were never supposed to cross ruts with a piece of equipment. As if there were places where it was okay to take a tractor or a cat and cross ruts, but where they'd never been crossed, my mother was just death on that. She'd really chastise my dad if we ever did that. And even today, if I'm out, chasing cows around, herding cows around, and I come across it with my 4-wheeler, I actually and my mother's been gone for 20 years. I still kind of look over my shoulder to make sure that I'm not going to get caught going across it. But we after they had done their study and said, okay, yeah, these are ruts, and they're actually some of the best ruts in the
Right here
of the well. You can't see them very good. There's actually ones that look better to me over across the creek that we'll come to, but we're really pleased with these. And Margaret and I ended up being chosen as the National Trail Stewards of the Year in 2014, and got a trip back to their national conference and got plaques and awards and stuff because of the effort that mostly my mother had undertaken to try to preserve them.
That's good. Yes.
Fallen off of the wagons there, but they were quite happy to find stuff.
So I'll just sit behind her and be flexible.
Old cell phones.
And Pat, didn't you say there was a group of kids, Mormon kids, that did a trek through here too?
Every 2 years, the Mormon Church does one. So they've probably been 5 different groups that have come through, and they're going to do 350 kids this July.
Oh, cool.
With hand carts is how Mormons came to the country.
Most of them go to Utah, the ones with the hand carts.
They did, but they also came to Oregon.
Oh, they got it.
And they follow the same route. I've worked with each one of the groups that have done their tour, and they actually do a really good job. As they before we put in our riparian limit fence, they would camp down on Rock Creek and make soap and do all kinds of the pioneering type stuff.
Somebody built this?
Yes, I'll stop here and just we'll look out the window at it, but I'll tell you the story. Let's see, is it gonna sit here? Yeah, it's gonna sit. So, my mother retired as a psychiatric nurse, and when she retired, she had lived in the Dalles all her life. Well, she'd grown up out here, but they moved to the Dalles in the early 40s, and she always wanted to live out here. And so as soon as she retired, she kind of moved in with us, but she wanted to build this house. And at the time, I had a little sawmill. The Iversons were actually doing some sawmilling for me, and she asked if she could have a couple boards. And I said, yeah, sure. Didn't bother to ask her what she was going to do with them. And a month went by, and the sawmill guy said, they kind of knew what I was doing, and the amount of boards that were missing didn't jive up. And they said, has somebody been getting into your board pile? And I said, I don't think so. And both my wife and I, worked in town, so weren't here all the time. So I asked my mom if she had seen anybody. Did anybody see anybody hauling any boards around? No. Well, she said, I took some. I asked you if I could have some. I said, well, you didn't take, like a big pile. Well, yeah, it was a pretty good sized pile. And I said, what the heck are you doing? She said, well, I was building a house. And so she was right around 70 when she started. And she worked on this for, about 7 years. It took her to get it to this point. She
built it herself?
She built, the only thing that she allowed my brother and I to help her with was the first row of plywood on the roof. And she did got the floor. She would have me bring sacks of mortar mix from the Dalles, and she glued all those rocks together and made the foundation. And then I got the floor built. And
that's 70?
About 75 was by the time that she got up to that level. And then she asked her, can we help you stand your walls up when you get those pounded together? And she said, no, she had that figured out. And what she did is she had a Studebaker car, and she got the bumper jack out of the Studebaker car and used that and 55-gallon drums to jack the walls up to get them stood up, and had ropes so that they wouldn't go too far, and put the boards on them for the siding, and then stood them up with a car jack and nailed them off, and then put braces up until she could get the rest of it built. But it took her a month to put her walls together and get them all. And she one of the unique things about it is that, like, most construction is based on 2-foot spacings or 16-inch spacing, so that almost all construction material is 4-foot wide, or 4-foot wide multiples. Right. And so you either put your structural members at 16 inches or 2-foot or 4-foot, so that they fit everything. And I was measuring her floor joists, and I want to say that
they look like they're 16.
They're not, though. I want to say they're 13. And I said, why did you do them like that? Well, that's how many I had. And she said, I counted up how many I had and then divided it, and that's the spacing that they were going to come. And that's the way the whole thing is there isn't any of it that's laid out like a normal person would do.
Oh, that's funny.
But when she was 78, and she got a boyfriend, and he had what she called a house car. He had a motorhome, and they took off and went to Canada in the house car, and she would have had it completed. She passed away when she was 82. But the last 3 or 4 years of her life, she was traveling, and so she didn't have a lot of time with her boyfriend, who was also in his 80s. and it was like having a teenage daughter, but it
Right.
it worked out good for them and they enjoyed it. But her house didn't get completed, and one of these days I'm going to get enough projects done that I'm going to actually finish it up for her and see if I can have it as a guest house or whatever. Another kind of interesting aspect of it is I was at the time that she started this, I was the chair of the Wasco County Planning Commission that kind of has the oversight on building permits. And I said, Mom, I hate to even bring this subject up, but is this? I happen to know, from experience that this is an exclusive farm use zone, and so you have to have, you got to go through some rigmarole in order to get to build a house. And she said, well, it's on a rock pile. She says, I'm not taking any good dirt, so I made sure I didn't place it, build it where anything could grow. And I said, yeah, that's a good idea. We can tell them that when we. She says, no, I'm not gonna mess with any of that. I said, we don't need to do that. And so I was, every time I'd, would be officiating away there at the planning commission, I always had that in the back of my mind that my mom was out here building this completely illegal structure, and that, but I was always going to be able to tell them that, hey, it's on a rock pile, so she isn't taking any good farmland. And
Right.
It kind of fits in with the way Oregon's land use.
Well, nobody had ever discovered it out here.
Yeah, I think we're probably pretty safe. And it's kind of been there long enough now, and I'm not on the planning commission anymore, so if you looked at it, you could actually say, it predated planning
there you
laws.
go.
Yeah.
Because everything in it is old, so. All right.
That's funny.
It is
That is
funny.
funny. Story.
How'd you come up with this spacing? That's good. You had that many boards.
Makes sense.
Yep.
This part of the road that we're on was built in the 20s by the county, and then the Barlow Road is actually down over the hill here. It stops right here. Actually, I'm going to back up a little bit, so just hang on. So there's kind of a path right there.
Oh, I see your thing. Yeah. Okay. This is good. Well, how'd they go through all them boulders?
I know.
The county rolled those boulders down in the road when they built this road.
Oh.
Is how that got there.
So why did they do that?
Is they didn't. It was too steep. Is it? You can kind of see when we get down there. Is that it goes past that sign about 10 feet, and then it turns and goes straight down the hill.
Oh, geez.
And so they didn't do a lot of grades, as they didn't have any way to move the dirt. And so they would they did a lot of straight up and down
So the wagon
traveling
tipped
with the-
over.
yeah, that, because it didn't want to be on the side hill.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the road, the original road, is just straight up and down out of the canyon. Sure. And what they would do is on the way down, they would have logs that people had cut and left there for that reason, and they'd put them through the wagon wheels so that they couldn't spin, and then they'd lock up the wheels with that log through the spokes of the wagon wheels, and then drag. Way it wouldn't run over the horses or the oxen or whatever was pulling
to
it.
break their fall.
And so they didn't need a grade.
Get out there.
I might, yeah. Steering a wagon going down some. I'll be the last one. I can go out backwards easier. So.
Okay.
So there's a pretty good path right here. Well, it's not that good.
Like 2012, I think he went up.
To what?
Oregon, remember we went in the Knothead, part of the Oregon Trail?
Oh, yeah.
2012 when I got my fingers.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah, we did what do they call that?
So here's the, you can see where the steel part of the wagon wheel got drug across this rock, as it's worn the rock right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the road actually turned right here and went back up the hill. So you can see this little dip right here, right across.
This way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
It came
okay.
straight off the hill there, down, across this, and then down below that oak tree, it went straight down past that pile of rocks down there.
Wow.
But yeah, with these, this is, I think one of the most interesting ruts is because it's actually ground into that rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there were steel wheels and enough of them going over it, I guess would be enough to wear it down.
Aim to.
And then they'd fill it up with ice in the wintertime, and that would be the refrigeration as far into the summer as they could get. The people that operated the gate, there was also a trading post at the gate, but they were quite a bit more expensive and were known to cheat you. And so this trading post got established so that people, mainly after the road got going, there were a lot of people that did freight, the freight haulers, and they would spend the night here, gather up whatever, buy whatever supplies they needed to get over to the next place you could buy supplies, which was over in Sandy. So they'd buy food for their horses and food for themselves and that type of thing. Spend the night here, and then it's only a little over a mile and a half over to the gate where you'd pay your toll, and they'd just pay the toll and wouldn't stop and trade at the trading post over there.
And this was about 1850?
It was actually, they didn't, doggone it, I should know that, but I believe that it was before that. I think that they started operation 1843, and by the mid 1850s, they moved and I think it probably had to do with the trading post not doing very much business, but they moved the gate to that, over closer to Sandy. And so the gate was on that side with a trading post. And, but this guy kept his trading post going here, up until the 20s.
Willie?
Really?
Yeah.
What was his name?
Willie Shakely. You can kind of see the outline of the trading post itself. His house was down on up the creek a ways.
So the gate that's up a mile and a half, is that the first?
That was the first gate.
First original
So they
gate.
made them like pay as
Yeah.
they went?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Because they
was
had
a
to
toll
cut
road,
down
yeah.
trees and
$5 for,
How much did they pay?
I know it was 10 cents per head of livestock, and I think it was $1.50 for a wagon, and then you paid extra for the amount of, if you had 4 horses, then you have to pay 10 cents for each one of the horses, and if you had a horse that you were riding to, then there was a whole set of criteria on how they figured out what to pay. As I had some folks that did this tour here several years ago, and one of the ladies brought a receipt that her family member that had come to Oregon via this had a receipt for the that their family had kept all that time. And I've seen I think the booklets that we have at the Smock Prairie School Museum, I think they also have a couple pages on what they charged. As over the years they charged different. As it kind of went from after the 50s, 1850s, it became more of a freight road than a pioneer immigrant road. And in fact, there's a lot of the homesteads that I think there's 12 homesteads that are on our property, where people that had gone to the valley via the road, lived over there for 4 or 5 years and saw that it was, wet and nasty, and that, remembered that when they came through here in September that it was nice. And so a lot of people ended up moving back over. And if you look at the kind of the date stamps on a lot of the homesteads in this part of the country, it was in the late 60s and early 70s. 1872 is when the irrigation district first started its irrigation system, building ditches and stuff up out of the mountains to get down in here to do irrigation. And so by the mid 1870s, there were actually a huge number of people that lived here. On rafts and floated down the river. And what Sam Barlow said was that, I'm not going to pay $50 to I'm going to drive over there. As he had talked to kind of visited with some Indians, and they said, yeah, there's a trail, and he knew enough about dealing with Indians that they were giving him the straight dope, and he figured that he could get his wagon through, and was able to do it. I mean, and then they improved it, of course, because it wasn't as easy as just driving through there.
No.
But you got to remember that they got to the Dalles in the later part of September, so it was almost wintertime.
Yeah.
And he headed for Portland, late in the fall, and it was one of the craziest things that, I mean, it'd be like
Not the time of
like
year
us taking off, and trying to get up 48 after the last guy,
Yeah.
with no chains.
Yeah.
And you end up, well, they did to a certain extent, but it was just because they were so frugal that they even thought about it, because nobody had even given it a thought. But it worked out for them.
Well, there was a long line too, wasn't there, at the Dalles that kept stacking up, took longer and longer to get on a raft.
I think as more people, but I've never read that was the issue.
I read that on a plaque somewhere.
That he was just adverse to spending the money to.
Oh, because they said he didn't want to wait that long. That backlog of pioneers waiting. But where did I read that? Was that in your book?
I don't know, it was in some book.
I read that just recently, but it's not the real reason.
Yeah, that would drive you crazy as a driver. That's really cool.
Somebody's phone ringing here? I have one bar.
Was it what? Well, that looks like that creek gets washed out in the spring.
It really gets to cooking in the spring, and it's a lot of water. this spring especially is after Rock Creek. This is Rock Creek, so it's on the same drainage as Rock Creek Reservoir. And after Rock Creek fills, then it gets all of the water from Rock Creek, Gate Creek, and 3 Mile. So it has a lot of water that comes down this creek. We had a lot of trouble with the banks eroding, and so 5 years ago we fenced the cows away from the bank, and you can actually see what it's done. Is we planted 2,000 willows, and there wasn't a single one that lived. And so we came back and planted. We went up the creek. Up in the Forest Service, they haven't had cows in there for quite a while, so there was some pretty good. I'm not even sure what variety they are, but planted those, got cuttings off of those, and brought those down and planted them, and I think every one of them lived, and then they really multiplied, and we've pretty much got just a few places where that bank isn't really well protected now, so that fence is really doing its job. Now, I was doing this tour for the Lutheran Church in the Dells, and I got to hear on that tour, and this lady that was sitting where Rusty sat said, "Whoa, stop, stop." So I stopped, and she said, "You're not going to take this bus across that bridge." And I said, "Well, yeah, it's a good bridge." No. We unloaded the whole bus. She wouldn't. The lady was just positive that we were going to drop through, and I drove the bus across, and then they loaded back in, and they all made it. So I wouldn't 100% guarantee it, but I really feel comfortable that we could drive the 88 across it.
Doesn't look like you have too far to go.
I know. I'm like in a drop.
Might have to walk home, but so has anybody ever mapped the whole trail through here to where the road leaves the trail and where it goes back?
They've Northwest Oregon California Pioneer Trails Association has done that, and they've GPSed both of them and have maps available on their website to show you exactly where it is. One of the reasons that we put those white posts up is they're spaced so that someone walking along the road can see the next one.
Oh.
And so it's kind of set up to do a walking tour.
Yeah, that'd be cool. That's interesting. We saw that Laurel Hills chute up there on Mount Hood. That was a nasty sucker. I don't know how they got down that.
I think I've read that they lowered him down with a block and tackle, with ropes.
Yeah, they
bullets.
did. They wrapped around the trees, and then they put trees. They cut down little trees and put them through the spokes, and to break their fall and lowered them down.
And this little, I'm not going to stop here, but this little gully you see on this side is where it comes up, and it just comes straight up out of the canyon. So they probably had to double up.
Oh. The trees and the spokes was not a new idea. They used it a lot.
That's the old county road turned and went that off to the west. And well, this was used to be a county road also. And then there's a plumber retired plumber in the Dells that wrote a book about all of the one-room schools in the county. A guy named John Lindell, and there was a one-room school right here.
Really?
Was the Maywood School, and there's absolutely nothing left of it. And I had asked the forensic archaeologist to kind of take a fast run down through there, and they said no, there was never anything here. They didn't even pick up any nails or anything.
Huh.
But that's what I've always been told it was, and that's where, according to John Lindell, it is.
You would think it would have picked up some nails. Point out we got a split in the road.
We're, you know what we're thinking is that somebody moved it. Is that the building got moved?
Oh.
Is the only thing that would account
Oh.
for not having a sign of
Yeah.
anything there. But even with that, you'd think there'd be
Something.
something that somebody would have dropped that would have, But
Yeah.
we couldn't find anything there. So this, I think, is probably the best set of ruts on the whole property.
You know, like that, yeah, we saw the carved and that rock on the wagons on the wheel. So the wagon on the wheel is the only wagons over different areas.
And here's, I think, oh, he's not over here yet.
Where is it? Right here.
Right
The
here,
sign.
you can see this swale right here. And then, I think you mentioned earlier that there were places where it splits. And we think that this has always been really wet in the spring. And so there's another set just right back over here that you can see. It's a little bit harder to see, but it kind of goes up around those little oak trees that way. And that when this was too wet to get through, then they'd moved over to this side. And these are pretty distinct all the way. There's about a mile of it here, from here over to our boundary with Forest Service. But
So the next marker should be up that way?
it's more over this direction, as it kind of
Really?
makes a slow roll. You should be able to see it from.
Yeah, you could, but I'm looking. I didn't know you could get.
Yeah, it kind of veers off to the right.
Yeah, it veers around this way, but you should be able to. That's the plan. I wonder if I hope a tree hasn't fallen on one of them.
Possible.
Well, now that you've mentioned that you can't see it, I got to walk up there a little ways.
See if it's still there. Still there.
Yeah, this is the other set of ruts here.
Yeah, I did not see it.
Oh, I can see it. It's in between the bushes right here.
Stake like this back there where
I think I can see it.
you put white stakes along here to point out
Maybe
the
not.
area.
Too low.
Yeah, you
No,
can
that
see
way.
the rest
Oh,
of
I
it.
can see it right here.
I see it right in the bush.
Yeah, right.
Oh, good.
It has a little black on top of it.
You stand right here, like straight ahead.
See it? I see it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
There it is. Yeah, it's got printed on top.
But another reason that you end up with two sets of ruts is that the wagons that used oxen, they don't turn on a dime. As it takes them about 250 feet in order to get a turn started. And so if they got out of line at all, you couldn't get them back. So they'd end up in a different spot. And once you got tracks, then the next wagon doesn't know, and it'll take them. But they also said that happened a lot. That you'd nod off, the wagon driver would nod off, and when he woke up, his oxen would be, heading for a green spot to get something to eat, and it would take him a while to get back to the regular trail.
But they all went together, right? Like
Right,
a group
yeah.
of them?
And I imagine, if you noticed that the guy behind you was veering off, you'd know that he had a tendency to fall asleep while you were, after lunch or something, and somebody would keep an eye on him. When we do the horseback one, of course, there's the Jarvis Briggs and his son Newton. I don't know if anyone's heard
You told us
about that, but just up the creek, well, the next creek over, about a mile and a half, there's a gravestone that is of Jarvis Briggs and his son Newton that were murdered by Indians, is what the gravestone says. And that was took place while the gate was actually in operation on Gate Creek. So there's just up probably a half a mile from where we're parked, the Forest Service had what they called the 411 office. It was the Township 4, Range 11 was the quarter section that it was on. And there were over 200 people that worked there. It was a bigger office than what they have in Sandy now. And we think probably that was one of the reasons that the school was here was because it was just a half a mile. It was just right at where the Barlow Road went through into the Forest Service after they'd established it, and they had a huge office there. Well, just on our place alone, there are 4 sawmill sites, and so each one of those, back in the day, each one of those sawmills had 10 to 15 people working at them, and so if you then take into account that every 160 acres also had a family that had homesteaded and were trying to farm, there was actually probably twice as many people in the 1920s that lived here than what live here now. And we think that it's really the population has really come up. It's starting to look like Bend around here, but it actually looked like in the 20s it actually looked like San Francisco around here because it was a lot of work. There were bigger mills also. The 4 that are on our property were all small mills that were operated by steam, and like I say, they had from 10 to 15 guys that worked at them, and then the big mills had hundreds of guys that worked at them, and so it took a fairly large contingent of Forest Service people to keep all of that going, which they had.
And the Singer place there were a bunch of old houses that are in far decline now.
My dad actually told about one of the first jobs that he got when he got here was piling lumber right there at the corner, right where you turn to go onto the blacktop from Barber Lane to turn onto the blacktop, was a lumber yard that took lumber from the 405, the woodcock mill, and that his job was to pile it up so that they could get a hold of it and get it on trucks. And
Wow.
it was, you know, just an amazing time and a huge amount of history here.
Oh, right.
Where is the Singer place from here?
You said Singer, but I'm going to say
Singer. Senger.
I was thinking you were saying Swisher.
No, Singers have the furthest north property along that.
Oh, Joy and
Neil.
Those Singers. I was trying to make it a historic.
Yeah, way back.
They are straight down this road for probably 2.5 miles.
Uh-huh.
As we're right lined up on the quarter on the section line that would come out at Singers.
So that's it.
That's it. I'll see if I can turn around.
That's the next
Good
step.
luck. Don't fall asleep. You end up in the middle of a pasture. Fall asleep.
I'm actually going to go down this road a ways. I think there's a better place to turn around than right there.
See, Pat, my mom was telling me she hasn't seen any rattlesnakes on her property. Have you seen any here at all?
In the 30 years that we've lived here, we've only seen one.
Oh, really? Huh. That's good.
Yeah, so
And I've always kind of wondered, it was the guy that delivers diesel that, and he was kind of renowned for telling stories. Was Lyle Driver, was who used to have
Yeah,
the
he was definitely renowned.
and my mother always thought that he got that rattlesnake someplace else and he said he killed it on our driveway and then brought it in. And my mother thought that he was telling a story, that he'd actually killed it someplace else and brought it in just to.
That's too funny. But that would be Lyle Driver. He would do that.
Webb homestead, and I want to say that it's an 1871 homestead. And Mr. Webb also cleared this meadow here. As this looked like the rest of the country until he started on it. It took the story is it took 15 years to clear this out to the size that it is now, and it had a huge barn and was actually quite a going concern. The Webb family still lives in the country. Rocky Webb,
Yeah.
Rocky and Jana are part of this Moses Webb.
Ken Webb would have been part of it.
I believe so. Yep.
Yes. And Joe Harvey, his daughter, lives in Webb.
I was hoping more of these lupine were going to be in bloom, but
Yeah.
we kind of missed them.
There's a little tire on it.
Yeah. It's not a way.
Whoa. had a lot of people that have asked about putting together a community bus ride over to the casino. And because you can actually drink in a bus.
Right.
And so
Yeah, they used to have the booze cruises.
there's a
Load up a bunch of young people that like to party and go around from bar to bar.
the conservation district had wanted to, is they have to rent a bus occasionally, and they knew that they'd heard the story about my bus, and so I actually researched it. And I went to my insurance agent, and he says, you know, I cringe every time that I see you now that I know you have a bus. He says, I don't think I could charge you enough money to insure that bus. Because I just know you're going to find a frozen lake someplace to drive 43 people off into. And we were going to do, when we were working on Rocky Burn environmental assessment, there was a field trip we wanted to take, and they were having trouble finding the bus. They said, well, we'll pay your insurance. And my insurance guy wanted $600 for one day for 30 miles worth of travel. They could get a bus for around 400, so they got one from Portland. If we took it to the casino down at Warm Springs, we definitely have to win.
Right.
Because it costs too much to buy insurance for a bus. But it works really good for this. It's
That's great.
We always have a big barbecue, kind of an appreciation as barbecue for all of the people my son and I do business with, or know, and family and all of that. And so we buy umbrella coverage on the ranch insurance policy, I think for $2.5 million, because you never know what's going to happen. You know, somebody's going to fall in the pond, and so that was one of the reasons for wanting to do that, because it also covers this bus ride. So. As long as they do it on the Memorial or Labor Day weekends, I'm covered.
drive into the original Gate Creek?
You could get almost there, because if you go down past where that where the Native Americans have got their camp, they're off of it's the first road north that goes to the east after you come up out of Gate Creek on 48. There's a road that goes back down and gets almost down to the to where the gate was on Gate Creek.
So then you can just walk from there.
Yeah, it's really a short.
Is it on private property or?
It's on ODFW property.
Okay. Oh, that's right. You said.
We did.
All over Creek or
And
anything?
not one
No.
of us died on the trail.
Right. This bus can take you anywhere. Pretty
It
much.
it
Hurry
really
bus.
could.
Yeah, nice.
It's good.
Go ahead. That's what ridiculous.
Thank you so much. It was so.
My pleasure. You know, let's give that to Jackie.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, well,
I've got another one. I was telling you.
They're pretty darn cute.
yeah, they are.
I have to back off. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Rusty about it. You're just hungry to go do it. But I'm thinking that
That's not what I guessed.
you know when my